Well, good evening to our new colleagues in Chile, and good morning to the AMPLA members joining us from all over Australia. I'm Gordon Bunyan, the Executive Director of AMPLA, and I'd like to begin the proceedings with just a little bit about AMPLA before I introduce you to our chair for the day. On behalf of AMPLA's President, Ryan Hartfield, and the board, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this inaugural AMPLA event in Chile. And I'm really pleased to let you know that we've had 93 people register for this event. Let me begin by just saying a little bit about AMPLA and about the members of the small committee in Chile who have worked to stimulate my interest and that of the board in the idea of forming a chapter of AMPLA in Chile. So what is AMPLA? AMPLA is the Energy and Resources Law Association, which began life in Australia in 1976 as the Australian Mining and Petroleum Lawyers Association. It was begun at the height of the resources boom, and it was the brainchild of one of our guests today, Professor Michael Cromwell. And it was formed in response to the boom and, of course, the need to enable and encourage lawyers and industry professionals to consider all aspects of the law governing the industry and to develop their understanding and expertise. And the aim was to do this jointly. This strong collegial philosophy has endured for 45 years, but in the last 5 years, we've expanded beyond Australia. So now we have an active branch in Asia, and we're excited about the developing in Chile and South America. I suppose briefly we're the Rocky Mountains Law Institute of the Southern Hemisphere. And AMPLA isn't strange actually to Chileans. So we've had Chileans attending our annual conference on a number of occasions, and we look forward to welcoming you again in the future. Australia was started and continues to be led by passionate volunteers, and that tradition has been followed in Chile. A committee was established in San Diego following Jorge Bravo's return from Melbourne University. And with Rafael, a regular AMPLA conference attendee, Diego, Rodrigo, and Benjamin, they put together this first AMPLA seminar with the assistance of the Chile Australia Chamber of Commerce. And we want to thank all of them on behalf of the AMPLA board. Allow me now to introduce Diego Bereba, who will be today's chair and who will introduce our special guest, the Australian Ambassador to Chile. Diego?
Thank you very much, Gordon, and thank you everyone for your interest in taking the time to be here. It is my distinct pleasure to chair this event, and to kick it off, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming and receiving and presenting to you the Australian Ambassador to Chile, the Honourable Mr. Todd Mercer, whom was, prior to his post as Ambassador to Chile, a high-ranking officer of the Department of Foreign Relations and Commerce. Prior to that, he was also High Commissioner to Brunei and Darussalam, and also Chief of the mission here in Chile time ago. Ambassador Mercer is actually married to a Chilean and has 2 Chilean daughters. Ambassador Mercer has a master's degree in international studies from the University of Sydney, a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Sydney, and a postgraduate diploma in arts from the University of Monash. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Mercer, who will address a few words before we begin the conference. Ambassador.
Thanks very much, Diego, and nice to meet you virtually. I hope to meet you in person sometime soon. But firstly, good evening to you, and good morning to those of you that are in Australia. I'd like to start by giving a few thank yous. I'd like to thank OzCham, an organisation which is very close and collaborates very close with the embassy here in Chile. I'd like to thank AMPLA and Gordon in particular for organising this event this evening to discuss AMPLA's work and the importance of energy and resources law. It's a subject which is particularly relevant to the Australia-Chile commercial relationship, and indeed important to our relationship with a number of countries in this part of the world. Thanks also to our distinguished speakers from AMPLA, Michael and Barry, to our panelists, Clara, Rafael and Gavin, as well as our moderator, Diego, for sharing your time and your insights today. And thank you. It's good to hear from Gordon that there's such a strong turnout, and that really, that's really encouraging. So thank you for your participation. I'm pleased to participate in the event today. It presents an opportunity to further deepen the ties between our two countries. And highlights the benefits of sharing experiences. And I know that's one of the fundamental tenets of AMPLA. The relationship between our two countries, as you heard, this is my second posting to Chile. I have a Chilean spouse and our daughters are also Australian, but it's a really close and there's a lot of substance to the relationship between the two countries. And it's because of the similarities between us, not only in terms of our geography, the fact that we're isolated, that we depend on our engaging with the world to move forward, the fact that we have natural resources, we have extensive countries, but we also share a lot in common in terms of the way we view the world, the way that we see the world, and the principles that guide us. So that's really important. We're like-minded in so many ways. We're deeply democratic, and Chile is going to demonstrate just how democratic they are time and time again. This year's a very busy electoral agenda for Chile, something that we're following very closely, and it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. We're also countries that are very committed to the defence of the international rules-based system or order. We're not large countries, but we're countries that depend on that engagement with the world. So in order to do that and to ensure that our interests are protected, we need to make sure that the rules-based system that underpins global trade and investment and relations between countries, that it's strong and that it's defended. One thing that I spent quite a bit of my career working on as a trade negotiator, and Chile and Australia share many common positions when it comes to negotiating free trade agreements, and we work very closely in that space. So there's a lot of scope for us to continue working together. It's a relationship over the time that I was away. The relationship continued to sort of diversify and become deeper. We work in areas like agriculture. I mentioned some of the issues we have in terms of challenges. Climate is one. Water management, we're working closely in that space. Infrastructure, science and innovation are just a few examples. But mining and METS has long been at the heart of the Australia-Chile business relationship. When I was posted here previously, it is now, and I think it will remain so for the foreseeable future. And again, it's a very important sector for us, but there are challenges that we face in common, and we're constantly talking with one another about water issues that affect the mining sector, about how to manage relationships with communities adjacent to mining operations, in particular Indigenous communities, and also, and we see companies like BHP here in Chile are very active in this space around the transition towards renewable energy sources for the mining sector. And renewable energy, and Clara will talk about her particular organisation, but that space is a particularly exciting area for Chile and Australia. We're countries that have particular strengths and lots of potential. In Australia, we're already a leader in renewable energy production, and Chile is rapidly transitioning and has massive potential in the north, lots of solar energy potential in the Atacama Desert, and wind potential as well particularly down south. So it's encouraging, again, in the bilateral sense that we're working, very closely bilaterally. We're looking to grow our involvement in the energy sector, and green hydrogen is currently at the forefront of that bilateral engagement. We were very pleased to see late last year, in October last year, an MOU was signed between the Australian Hydrogen Council and H2 Chile, which is the Hydrogen Council's Chilean counterpart. As our speakers will no doubt discuss, while we are competitors can benefit from strategically cooperating with one another. We want to sort of reach out beyond Australia, and we think that competition, as they say, it's a very hard word to pronounce. We think it's something that can create opportunities for both of us. It's not a win-lose situation. We can see significant potential for both countries, and we think that potential is even greater if we cooperate in that space. I'm not an expert on mining and energy law, and for that reason, I want to hand over to the experts that are gathered here tonight. You'll learn a lot more from them, and I'm sure I'll learn a significant amount as well. Thank you again to AMPLA. Thank you to AusChamp for your support, and I'll hand you back to Gordon now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll step in ahead of Diego just here to introduce and welcome Professor Michael Crommelin. As I mentioned, Professor Crommelin sees AMPLA as a critical part of the way in which lawyers developed. It was his brainchild, in fact, in the 70s during the mining boom, as I mentioned. Professor Michael Crommelin is the Zelman Cowen Professor of the Law at the University of Melbourne. He was also the first editor of AMPLA's quality journal, the Australian Resources and Energy Law Journal. Finally, insofar as today is concerned, he also inspired the establishment of this committee in Chile. Jorge was one of his students in the master's program, and when he returned to Chile, he contacted me on Michael's suggestion, and the result is today. It gives me great pleasure to invite Michael to make some introductory comments on AMPLA, its philosophy, and the benefits it brings to those practicing in the resources and energy industry. Michael?
Thanks, Gordon, for the opportunity to speak on this occasion, as it's a very great pleasure for me to do so. Ambassador and seminar participants. Australia, as you know, has had several mining and petroleum booms. One of those occurred in the 60s with a big impact in many parts of the country, notably, of course, Western Australia, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. Lawyers then were required to devise innovative legal frameworks for unfamiliar but large and enduring resources projects. When the dust settled briefly in the 1970s, several involved in the 60s boom recognised the need for wider and deeper understanding of the law relating to these immensely valuable resources. A meeting was held in Melbourne in 1976, as Gordon has mentioned, which resolved to establish a professional association dedicated to the development of that understanding. It was then called the Australian Mining and Petroleum Law Association, but soon became AMPLA. AMPLA's mission was straightforward: to promote understanding of mineral and petroleum law among legal practitioners, government officials, and university professors. This mission was based on two critical assumptions. The first was that the mission would best be achieved by cooperation among those who chose to take part in the bold venture through sharing their information experience, and knowledges at conferences, meetings, and through publications. The second assumption was that the members themselves would benefit, both professionally and personally, from opportunities to meet and get to know one another locally and across the country at AMPLA conferences and meetings. In May 1977, only 6 months or so later, the proposal to establish the association was confirmed at AMPLA's first national conference in Melbourne, attended significantly by participants from all over the country. At that conference, AMPLA acquired its envious reputation for combining excellent working papers with outstanding social events, a reputation that it still has today. The subsequent publication of the conference papers was itself a landmark in the development of Australia's specialist literature on mining and petroleum law, now recognised in many other countries. As one of those lucky enough to be there at the beginning, I note with particular satisfaction that both of the assumptions that underpins AMPLA's original mission have since been firmly vindicated. AMPLA owes its continuing success to a generous spirit of cooperation among its members, who continue to enjoy the benefits and pleasure of meeting and getting to know one another in Australia and now overseas, travel permitting, while working to promote understanding of, in today's terms, energy and resources law. I conclude these remarks by congratulating the seminar organisers for their initiative, energy and enthusiasm, especially in these very difficult times. Good luck and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your words. We're grateful for your encouragement, and we hope we don't disappoint you with this first inaugural event, and hope to have many more where we can share with the social events that you've told us about. Without further ado, it is my honor now to introduce the panel that we have put together for today's event. We are joined today by Mr. Rafael Vergara, who is a partner at Carey & Company and a professor of mining law. Rafael is co-head of the firm's Natural Resources and Environmental Group, and his practice focuses on natural resources, mining, water rights, energy, environment, surface lands, project financing, and corporate and commercial law. He is a professor of mining law in the University of Chile and in the University of Los Andes. He is an arbitrator as well at the Chamber of Commerce of Santiago, and he received his law degree from the University of Chile. Along with Rafael, we will be joined by Clara Bowman. She is the general manager of AME, an independent power producer based here in Santiago, which in 2020 launched HIF, an affiliate company dedicated to the development and production of carbon neutral e-fuels in Chile, the USA, and Australia. Clara is a director of the Australian-Chilean Chamber of Commerce, and in 2019 was shortlisted in Capital Magazine's Chilean Female Executive of the Year. Before moving to Chile to join AME in 2010, Clara worked as an attorney at Freehills. Last but not least, we are also joined by Gavin Scott, partner at the global law firm of Norton Rose Fulbright. He has practiced in the areas of mining law for over 20 years and specializes in assisting clients to achieve successful outcomes in engaging with Indigenous groups. Gavin is recognized in chambers and in native titles and has worked on Indigenous and community issues in Australia, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and Brazil. He was also responsible for the recent redrafting of the Equator Principles in relation to embedding the use of IFC Performance Standard 7 and best practice stakeholder engagement into the principles. As you can see, we've got a powerhouse panel put together here, and they will each in turn present their papers on the subject matters that have been provided in the flyer for this event. And I would encourage everyone here to pose questions in the group chat that may arise on occasion of each one of these presentations, after which we will follow with a panel discussion and entertain questions. So without further ado, Rafael, if you would please give us the honor of kicking this off. Go ahead.
Thank you, Diego, and thank you for the audience to be here relatively early in the morning in Australia, but later in the evening in Chile. So thank you very much for being part of this audience, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. And I would like to I mean, in our previous discussions with some of fellows that are here, you know, there were some ideas of what would be convenient for Australians to know a little bit, I mean, to know in this seminar. Because something that, I mean, what I will say right now is something that is very well known by the Chilean colleagues, but I hope to give you some some feeling or ideas for the Australians colleagues. So with that excuse, I mean, with that reason or motive have in mind, I will explain to you in brief what, in my view, is or are the current trends in exploration and exploitation in Chile. And Chile is always has been a country with plenty of mining activity. No? Typical phrase: Chile is a mining country. In the last 15 years, the mining industry has accounted for an annual average of over 12% of the GDP, and in some years with 20%, depending on the prices of the commodities. Some other figures give you, the idea of the importance of the mining in our country. Chile is the first producer of copper in the world, and the second in molybdenum, and among the 6 most important producers in silver. 7% of the world's metal exploration was carried out in Chile. Almost 9% of the country's employment comes from the mining industry. And more than 6,000 Chilean companies are mining suppliers. So those are, figures that create the correct ambience to understand how important is the mining activity in our country. And I will refer now some of the issues that are of concern today, which is, the first one is the constitutional reform process currently taking place. And then I will refer to the main difficulties and opportunities, I would say, that our minings are facing. If there is some, minutes still, I will refer to the mining industry and COVID. Referring to the constitutional reform process, I would start with saying that the regulatory framework on mining has remained virtually unmodified since its enactment in early 80s. This framework is composed essentially by the Constitution, a organic constitutional law, which is the highest in ranking in the sense that it enhances quorum, and finally is composed by the mining code. Chile is going right now through a constitutional reform process approved by a plebiscite held in October 2020, in which it was also approved that the new constitution will be drafted by a constitutional convention, that is a body composed of elected citizens, the voting of which is scheduled for a couple or 3 more weeks. The tasks of the convention is expected to be completed by the end of 2022. In the various meetings, seminars, and commissions I have attended to in the last few months to discuss the content of this new constitution, I have seen I would say, a fair degree of consensus amongst specialists and representatives of the political ideologies and parties that have governed in Chile for the last 30 years, in that the main structure of the mining regulatory framework must be preserved or should be preserved. This includes one, first, ownership of the state over all mines. Second, definition of concessible and non-concessible mineral substances by means of laws with enhanced voting requirements, high rank law. Granting and termination of mining concessions by means of judicial ruling as well as litigation related thereto. Constitutional protection to property rights over mining concessions. And finally, rights and obligations of holders of mining concessions by means of laws with enhanced, again, voting requirements. There is, I'm afraid, some different views on whether a royalty should be set forth in addition to the payment of an annual license over mining concessions. Actually, the day before, yesterday, it was voted in the Congress and the House of Deputies or Representatives approved a royalty, which is, is an approval, is an unconstitutional approval because it's reserved to the president, I would say the possibility of sending a message to create a law in this regard, and notwithstanding, they put into the voting and they voted for this stuff. While this is a matter of a legal level rather than constitutional debate, the discussion is already taking place, without consensus, particularly in these days in which copper, lithium, and other commodities and minerals are there, probably higher prices in the last few years, which obviously creates expectations in that the state has or should have a higher stake on the income generated from their exploitation. So that is, in general terms, I would say, what is happening with respect to the constitutional reform process. A second issue is the main challenges, opportunities, or difficulties, or problems, or situations that the miners are facing right now. And I would say that the main concerns or challenges in the mine industry relate to the social license to operate, meaning the approval of communities surrounding the project, indigenous or not indigenous, for the development of a mining project. The process of environmental impact assessment by means of the environmental impact assessment system comprises a stage of citizen participation that is mandatory for projects assessed by way of an environmental impact study, and optional and upon request by interest parties in the case of project assessed by a declaration, environmental impact declaration. Mining projects typically generate a lot of interest and even opposition in Chile due to the location of the sites. And because mining is perceived as an activity, sometimes with significant impacts on the environment. All of which translate into high levels of active involvement of the communities in the citizen participation stage. Also, Chile is a party to the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention, the 169 Convention of the ILO, and therefore in the context of the environmental assessment process, the environmental authority is required to implement a proceeding for Indigenous people consultation and participation. Consequently, community engagement with indigenous and non-indigenous is crucial for project to succeed. And that's why mining companies have started to develop early community engagement processes and activities as part of the preliminary stages of mining projects to anticipate conversations and negotiations with the communities that exist in the project's area of influence. Early community engagement is not required by law, but responds to the interest of mining companies in avoiding, or at least reducing, the potential of social unrest or opposition against the project in the corresponding stages of the environmental assessment process. Another of the significant challenges that are present in the mine industry in Chile is water supply. As the ambassador said, mining activities themselves do not require large amount of water, but in Chile, most of the mining projects, as in Australia, are located in areas of water shortage, where they have to compete with other productive activities, mainly agriculture. This has led mining companies to seek for alternative sources of water supply, being the desalination of seawater the most important solution. For instance, BHP Spencer plant and Codelco Radomiro Tomic plant. In terms of access to surface lands, a relatively recent trend is that holding mining concession is not enough to obtain rights of access and occupation over surface land. Mining easements. Generally, it is now necessary to demonstrate that there is an actual or prospective mining project in place. Other trend that I have observed refers to the development of mining projects over non-traditional minerals, like rare earth, lithium, cobalt. There are some projects in the pipeline regarding those new minerals, I would say. An important breakthrough is, particularly for exploited mining companies, was the recently enacted amendment to the law on closure of mining sites and facilities, allowing mining companies to provide insurance policies as performance guarantee. Finally, one of the latest trends in the industry has been the implementation and remote operation and maintenance operation systems and devices for mining projects, which is the case of Codelco, Teck, and Anglo American. I'm afraid that I'm a little exceeded on time, and I will leave for a subsequent stage the COVID-19 related issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rafael, for a very interesting presentation. And it's hard to keep to time limits when there's so much to discuss, but I'm certain that the panel discussion and the questions from the audience will add to that and help us out. It is now Clara's turn to present in respect of co-opetition and large-scale hydrogen developments in Chile. Clara, please.
Thank you very much, Diego, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I started off my career as an Australian lawyer, and I've now been here working in Chile for 11 years, not as a lawyer, but still obviously using a lot of the training that I had. So I'm very pleased to be at this event organized by AMPLA. So I thought I might start just very briefly talking about what is an e-fuel. And I know that when I was introduced, the ambassador mentioned also that we've been working on an e-fuels project. Many people might not know what that is. So basically what we're doing, we take renewable energy, we take water, and from the water with the energy, we produce hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen we mix with carbon dioxide, which has been taken either from an industrial source or directly taken out of the air. We mix it together in a reactor, and at the end we get an e-fuel. And this e-fuel is basically chemically identical or a cleaner version than a fossil fuel. And that means that we can slot right in and use it as a replacement for fossil fuels in all its forms. So the e-fuels that we're making in our Chilean project are methanol and gasoline. So you can imagine running your car on basically green fuel or carbon neutral fuel, where the same carbon dioxide that you release when you run your car is the carbon dioxide that you've taken from the atmosphere, or we've taken from the atmosphere when we've made the fuel. And so stop share. And so I say that just because I'm going to talk about the hydrogen economy, and to me the hydrogen economy means more than just hydrogen. So in fact I think that as an export market, probably hydrogen itself is going to be a product that's going to be difficult to export by itself. And what we're going to be seeing is products that are derivatives of hydrogen, whether the e-fuels, which is what we're making, ammonia, or other products that are based on hydrogen and can be exported. So Ambassador Mercer just took a little bit of my talk when he spoke about all the similarities between Chile and Australia, so I won't repeat them. There are a lot. And I think that we could add to that list now the potential to be hydrogen production powerhouses. And there's basically 3 factors that you need to be a hydrogen export powerhouse. The first is the quality of the resource. And so that's something that both Chile and Australia share: excellent wind resources, excellent solar resources. That's why we've seen a huge renewable energy boom in the 2 countries over the past 5 years. The other factor that you need is to be able to do this at scale. So these projects have huge economy of scale effects. And so when we talk about scale, we talk about doing projects that are thousands of megawatts or gigawatt projects. We talk about doing stuff that is going to cost between $4 billion per train. We talk about trains as we do with LNG. So really large scale projects. And again, that's something that Chile has and Australia has, is the ability to have these very large scale renewable energy projects, and then take that renewable energy, package it up, and basically export it to the world, which is the opportunity that we have here. The third thing that you need is access to very low cost finance, highly liquid finance, to be able to build those projects. And again, that's something that Chile has seen, the influx of finance to build the renewable projects that it's been building over the past 5 years. And in Australia as well, the same thing: huge renewable investment, and also investment in LNG, multi-billion-dollar projects that have been very successful over the past, say, 5 to 10 years. So this new industry presents huge export market opportunities. Both Chile and Australia have a big tradition of digging stuff up and selling it in Asia as the basis of their economy. And now I think that we can add hydrogen to that. Our traditional trading partners in Asia and in Europe are looking for low carbon alternatives. Everyone's looking to do a transition to the low carbon economy. China, Japan, and Europe have all said that they're looking to get to net zero by 2050. And they're going to have to do that by importing energy, because these places, particularly in Europe, do not have their own, and Japan do not have their own indigenous sources of renewable energy at a quality and a quantity that they can be able to supply their own market and accelerate the transition to a zero carbon economy without importing that in from places where the renewable energy is more efficient, like Chile and Australia. And this is a tremendous opportunity for countries like Chile. In fact, as Rafael said, copper today can sometimes get up to 20% of Chile's GDP. And the Chilean government in a recent report said that they think that hydrogen could potentially equal that. So we're talking about a huge export industry. So if both countries want to sell the same stuff to the same people, why should we cooperate? Why shouldn't we fight to the death, as we do, for example, in the wine industry? And I think that there's 2 reasons for that. The first reason is that, unlike wine, which has been drunk for thousands of years, you don't need to build a market. People love wine. Here we need to build a market. So I think that there's a general will that people are wanting to move towards low carbon solutions. They don't know how to do it. And so companies like ours, which are trying to lead the charge in building an export market for these products, it's actually helpful for us to have other people from other places doing the same thing and saying, yes, this is possible. We can do it. We can do it at a reasonable price. And these are the ingredients, and these are the things that we need to do that, because as we start to collect more and more people and have a consensus on that, we build a huge market. And the market here is basically the replacement of all petroleum in the world. So we're talking about an enormous market, a multi-trillion-dollar market. There's space for everyone. And what's far more important than kind of fighting amongst ourselves about who's going to get one contract here or there is building this, the market as a whole, and growing the pie so that we can all participate in it together. I'd also say that there's a second very important reason why we should be collaborating here, which is that, again, unlike wine, the future of humanity basically depends on us getting this right. And so I'd say there's probably a strong moral imperative for us to be collaborating here, and for us to be trying to find solutions that in the end are good business for everyone, and bring forward the date that we can say that we're carbon neutral and that we've got climate change under control. So finally, just to finish, how can we collaborate? There's technical collaboration, and actually in our company we've been working with the CSIRO on different technical initiatives that have been extremely interesting. There's a huge research and development culture in Australia, a growing one in Chile, and I think the collaboration on the technical side is extremely important. We're all here, we're all lawyers. There's also a huge legal collaboration that I think we can do. Here we're talking about project finance, we're talking about infrastructure. It's the same as maybe an energy infrastructure project or an LNG project, but it is also new. And so it's going to require new solutions. It's going to require us to sit down and think about how we structure these things, how we can get past some of the impediments that we might have as we move forward. And it was very interesting listening to Professor Cromlin talking about some of the challenges that people had bringing in the legal structures to the initial mining projects. And that's basically where we are right now. We're at the beginning of a huge multi-billion-dollar industry, and we're going to need structuring solutions and for us all to come together and think about how that can best be done. And I think that there is space for a very strong collaboration between our countries on that. And then there's standards, regulations, permitting, all of the kind of legal framework that goes behind these projects. And again, you know, that's an area where I think we can collaborate to set standards, to not reinvent the wheel every time, to be able to get a consensus on what's a good way of doing things, agree that and move forward. So I think that that's another strong area of collaboration where an entity such as AMPLA bridging the Australian and Chile legal worlds can help us to try and get to a consensus on those points. And so that's I think what I wanted to say today. And I'm very happy that we're building these bridges between Australia and Chile in the legal community. And I hope that we can work together in the hydrogen export space to try and make a better future for all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Clara, for a fascinating topic and the trending one at that. I can think of a number of questions for you, and I'm certain the audience will provide them as well. So we'll continue with Gavin Scott, who will present now about best practices of stakeholder engagement with Indigenous communities, legal and industry trends. Gavin, please.
Thanks, Diego, and thanks, Clara and Raphael. I just, fascinated how much commonality there is between our two industries, both in reform and exploration space, in the drive for new markets and new products such as hydrogen. This is actually just such a good discussion to have amongst friends. Before I start my session, can I just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm presenting to you. I'm coming from Brisbane today. That's the traditional owners, the Jagera and the Turrbal people. And I extend my respect to all traditional owners of the people and the country to where you are listening from as well. It's good to have seen, I've been involved for AMPLA for over 20 years, and we've moved obviously beyond the M and the P of mining and petroleum, and obviously smack bang in the middle of energy and resources. So when we talk of the energy transition, we also see that in our own organisation, and much of the time in the Australian base is spent on power, on renewables, on critical minerals and the like that Raphael was also mentioning. I want to sort of spend my time just talking about two key issues where I see great opportunities, not only for making projects better, but making the planet better. And that's the rise of these ESG risks into the realm of both an operational and a financial risk, as opposed to what people have historically seen as reputational risks. And when I say ESG, people understand environmental, social, and governance issues. I'm going to concentrate on the S, which is not often seen. We talk about climate and the like. We talk about anti-bribery and modern slavery and the like in the G. So today we'll be talking about the S. And the two key issues I'm going to focus on are how projects, all types of natural resources projects, mining, oil and gas, renewables, are moving forward with better practices in consultation or consents with First Nations groups. And then also I want to really touch at the end on a particularly fascinating aspect, I think, which is the rise of more cultural heritage risks, which we will have seen as one of the outputs of the recent incident in Western Australia with the Juukan Gorge incident by Rio Tinto. I think you won't come to anybody's surprise on this panel that mass scale resources projects, be they copper mines, iron ore mines, or mass hydrogen renewables projects often are situated on lands where there have been traditional ownership. And history of this planet and colonisation will show that there have been varying degrees of how major projects have engaged with those traditional owners. And I'll use that as a generic term for Indigenous groups, historical groups, community groups, tribal groups, and the like. So we've seen, you know, a history of either not needing to talk to anyone about getting consents for projects, having some sort of lip service, nominal engagement, through to a push, I think, mainly from the 70s onwards, about states and countries bringing forward legislation that permeates legal rights of traditional groups, you know, whether it's from a low form of consultation or seeking comment through to obtaining consent and the like. My thesis for this talk, though, is that I think that in 2021, what we're seeing is that the laws of host nations, wherever they sit on that spectrum, are largely becoming irrelevant. And I think that's because of this financial and operational risk that is presenting itself for these major projects. And I think what we are seeing both here and in Chile is financiers, private equity, project finance are really driving the narrative. So that if you're if you're developing a project in a country that might require some form of consultation or a lower form of consultation with a community group, what we're seeing is that financiers of those projects are actually requiring projects to take a far greater step, really, you know, acknowledging base level compliance of local laws, but then requiring compliance with this growing trend of international standards. Now, Raphael mentioned ILO 169. We've also seen the IFC performance standards and the Equator principles. And there's a great body of work out there that shows that as an international community looking at these projects, there are higher standards and higher expectations to be met. Now, that coupled with what we've seen in the level of NGO, investor, shareholder activism creates this perfect storm, whereby it's not enough now for a project to say, I've complied with the local environmental impact and social impact requirements and my project is good to go. That's largely irrelevant if there's a protest sitting at the gate of the mine because you know, proper consultation or proper grievance mechanisms haven't been implemented. Now, what does that mean for us as lawyers? Well, I think we've got a huge opportunity to help clients understand that whole gamut and range of risks and actions to deal with those risks. Much of my time is spent, I guess, with half a lawyer's hat on, but half a stakeholder engagement manager's hat on as well. And Raphael identified it quite well, I think, in talking about, you know, issues that aren't necessarily required by law, but certainly, as we've seen, are required by the larger court of community expectations. I think we've moved past that sort of glib phrase of social license to operate, and we've moved through into a more impressive and important realm of adequate stakeholder engagement. And I commend anyone who wants to learn more about that to really go and read well the Equator principles, the IFC performance standards, to see what we have seen international financiers require. The final thing that I want to leave you with then is just how that presents itself, particularly in issues and areas where we're dealing with Indigenous groups that have at the heart of their community a deep spiritual connection to the land on which they live. And we see that a lot in Australia with Australian Indigenous population, but I see that in Papua New Guinea, we see that in groups in Indonesia, and you'll obviously South America as well. The issue that I think is on the absolute rise and needs to be thought about in any due diligence process for financiers or for project developers is not looking at cultural heritage as an archaeological or a scientific issue, but moving from that scientific to sacred. And we'll have seen the output of the Rio Tinto incident, where although you know, a physical land-based structure as a cave was destroyed, but the outcry and the outpour and the ramifications have been because of the spiritual and the sacred nature of that particular cave. And so we're seeing the development of laws all around the world that move from that sort of archaeological point into the more spiritual and sacred connection, the intangible stories. In an Australian context, it's Dreamtime stories and songlines of Aboriginal groups. And when you're dealing with a project that has a large land impact, whether it's a mass solar farm or wind farm or a open cut mine, what we're seeing is that financiers and project developers are requiring a large amount of due diligence in how that project is going to impact on these other intangible elements of the cultural heritage of the community in which that is hosting that project. And I see that time and time again with questions that are coming from particularly overseas financiers. So the moral of my story today, which I think fits nicely with both the energy transition process that Clara has talked about and the reform that we see in Chilean exploration law, is that you need to be on the lookout of the requirements of financing of these projects, coupled with the really acceleration of activism for ESG risks. And I think lawyers have a great place to play in helping clients not only identify that, but also then manage those risks and create the necessary action plans and stakeholder engagement plans to move those things forward. If we don't do that, in simplistic terms, not very legal terms, quite bad things will happen for the project. And that's my story.
Thank you so much, Gavin, for that thought-provoking presentation. I'm certain we'll get questions, and I've got a few in my head. I'm happy to say we've already received a first question from our audience, and I'll take this opportunity to invite everyone to please don't be shy and pump through some questions. But just to get things kicked off, I'll take it on myself to pose a first question to each one of the speakers, so we can get some engaging conversation while the audience pumps through their questions. Let me begin with Clara. Yours is a very high trending topic today, and I'm sure it's catching the attention of not just regulators and lawyers, but you know, the average Joe in general, just the prospect of clean energy, different energy, and what that means for commuting and heating and whatnot. What do you, Clara, identify, or what do you see as the biggest challenges to be overcome in order to start building low carbon infrastructure? What can you tell us about that? What do you see from where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Diego. I think that there's a few challenges. Of course, you know, on the technological side, we need to get the scale up of the technology. I think a lot of the technology has been around for a while. It hasn't made sense to be used before because it's only been recently in the past 5 years that renewable energy has become so cheap. You know, the prices have just fallen off a cliff basically. And that's what has made the energy revolution really feasible. Because we now have renewable energy that basically can be used as a feedstock, and it's at very, very low prices if you go to the right parts of the world. So there is a technological scale up that needs to happen. There needs to be long-term offtake agreements, and you know, people taking position on these long-term offtake agreements need to be willing to commit to a fixed price for the next 10 or 12 years. And need to also know that probably the price is going to be going down over time, just as happened with the renewable energy sector. I mean, we ourselves have experienced the joys of building a renewable energy plant, and as we're inaugurating it, we know that we could have signed a contract for, you know, 30% less for the same construction, you know, 1 year later, and that's going to be the case as we move forward with this as well. As the technology scales up, prices are going to come down, but there's going to need to be some leaders who are willing to sign these long-term offtake agreements to be able to finance the projects that are underpinned by them, or that they underpin. And the next thing is going to be getting, like, all of the banks and financing community across the line on these projects, and that means having the right structure. But ultimately, I think that there is a lot of liquidity in the world looking for the energy transition. And so a well-structured project where you get the risks right should have the liquidity there.
Thank you so much, Clara. And what you're telling us here is very encouraging for us lawyers, because from wherever you want to look at it, it looks like there's a ton of work from intellectual property, financing, contracts, the whole works. So looks like a bright future on that end. Thank you, Clara. Gavin, let me move to you. Very thought-provoking, your presentation. And I'm wondering, what do you believe underscores or has caused the rise in activism among investors and shareholders? Is there one common factor? Are there many different factors? What do you see? What has your experience told you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's it's that global trend where I've had this theory that you follow the money and see where it goes, to quote Hamilton. You've got financiers moving beyond that sort of triple bottom line theory of the 80s and 90s. You've got people who are investing, you have their superannuation or their pension funds, sitting away in the trillions. It's that grassroots movement that moves up and up and up quickly. And that's presented really well, say, with the annual BlackRock letters to projects to say you need to do better about climate. Now, I would expect that you'll see more and more of those sorts of those letters and that pressure. We've seen, superannuation funds, pension funds, all of the Canadian pension funds write or have very public displays of, if we are investing in a particular project, it must meet the standards that our membership demands. And I think that is at the core, because it's no longer good enough to make profit for profit's sake. As Clara has said, there's a moral imperative that I think we're seeing through many financial institutions, and that has then coupled with the Greta Thunberg sort of phenomenon, the Extinction Rebellion phenomenon, and you've got this sort of grassroots meets Wall Street pressure point that all points in the one direction. I can't see it stopping.
Absolutely, it's probably something that'll have what I reckon is the snowball effect. More associations, more scrutiny, and certainly the press will be on top of it and forming public opinion. So something to keep an eye on, and something to keep in the back of your mind at all times. I think given any project, whether it be mining, energy, petroleum, or otherwise.
Correct.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Rafael, let me turn to you before taking on some questions from the audience. One of the issues that you were short on time to address, and that is worldwide now, is the COVID pandemic. Besides environmental regulations, royalties, and the possibility of facing a new constitution, how has COVID hit the mining industry here in Chile? Has the mining industry acted proactively? Has it avoided disaster? Is it facing disaster? What thoughts can you provide us on that front?
Thank you for the question, Diego, because it gives me the opportunity to go into an issue that is interesting in my view, because what has happened in Chile is a kind of a role model that can be appreciated here, because the mining industry has not stopped. I mean, there are three. I would say the exploitation or the operation is based in three pillars here during the COVID. The continuity of the operation, and I should start from the previous one, which is the health and the security of the people, of the workers, and the suppliers. The second pillar is the continuity of the work, and the third is the not stop the chain of payments to the suppliers. The first one is something that I would say the safety and health of the employees, and is something that quite unique in terms of what the measures have been taken by the companies. And actually the level of the COVID in the mining operations are very low, probably the lowest in the activities in Chile. It has been also handled the continuity of the operations through the changes of shifts, some measures in order to avoid the contact of the people, and actually the operation in Chile did not stop, which meant, you know, that the country received the benefit of producing, while we saw even in neighbors here in South America, some operation which had to stop. Here we did not stop in any case, and we did not reduce the production, and also, which was very important, because as I said, you know, there are more than 6,000 suppliers companies related or you know, linked to the mining industry, and what was critical was you know, the fact that it was not stopped also the chain of payment to the suppliers, you know? And so the activity continued in the exploration, in the exploitation, in the operations, and what had, you know, an effect was related to the new projects. They stopped in the continuation of their development. But now, I mean, recently I have heard that those new projects are still, I mean, now again starting. And what I'm afraid was affected was the exploration. You know, the exploration was slow, and the problems or the difficulties to get the permits to get outside, which is different in the case of the operations, were the difficulties to make an exploration as the previous years. But in general terms, what we have to be very proud is the fact that all the mines continued with the operations, you know, and the companies made a huge effort in order to continue with that.
Thank you, Rafael, and absolutely in agreement with you. At least speaking on the basis of my experience at Codelco and what this has meant for the safety, security, and health of our workers, the great effort and coordination required to keep operations going is really something that's outstanding. It's impressive, and the same thing goes for all other operations here in Chile. Certainly, it's meritorious for management across all these companies, and even more so, like you say, when we know that the industry here in Chile, at least, is so large, so important, that it affects the lives of everyone, definitely, because I don't believe, really, at the end of the day, that there are any jobs along this string bean country that don't depend directly or indirectly on mining. So the fact that the providers of goods and services to the mining industry also can continue making their living and continue paying their bills and their grocery and whatnot keeps things moving and going. So kudos to everyone in that respect. That's a great point. Now, I'm going to turn to questions from the audience. A few have come through. So the panel, but some of them come directly to one of the three speakers, but I'll put them forward generally so that if anyone of the panelists have any thoughts and ideas that they would like to reflect on this occasion, we can do so. One of the first ones I have is that we've all heard about certain negative experiences with cultural heritage in Australia. Don't want to give any names specifically, but the question there would be, are you, Gavin, or anybody else aware of any good positive experience with regards to mining and First Nations in the context of cultural heritage? For instance, support in building museums, adding value to cultural heritage, etc. Is there anything that can be said about that?
Absolutely, and I think you'll see that more. The larger global mining companies have been doing that as part of their stakeholder engagement policies for years, if not decades. Often you only see the negative things in the press, but I've acted for mining, oil and gas, and renewables projects across the country, and it's not just agreement for a consent or compensation payment for a no objection. That doesn't work and hasn't worked for many years. So what you do see is quite a comprehensive and sophisticated stakeholder engagement process, identifying the right groups that are impacted by the project, understanding their decision-making process, engaging thoughtfully and meaningfully about the impact of the project on their community and their cultural heritage. And then usually what you'll have then is some form of agreement about, well, as a project is developed, how does one assess, survey, curate or mitigate impacts? And that can certainly result in, particularly for a mine, say an open cut mine, the collection of the archaeological material, the funding of what's known as keeping places or interpretive workshops and the like. And that certainly goes, a bit along the way to managing those risk elements and to forming a good relationship with the Indigenous group that the mine is engaging with. There's also good programs for, particularly in this day and age, for digital recording of stories, of landscapes, and helping the communities reconnect with the land themselves and train their children and their junior people who may not have necessarily engaged with that landscape except for cultural heritage work that's related to the mine. So there's actually quite a nice community support package that can be developed. So thank you for the question, whoever wrote it. But yes, there are many good stories, and I think I see even more of those in the renewables space. Obviously, a large renewables project wants to be clean and green, but also wants to really have at its core full support of the entire community, and that will, in Australia and no doubt in Chile, because they're quite land intensive projects, be the same. It might not be digging a large hole, therefore destroying things, but there is still a land impact. And so there's some very good stories, both in partnerships, in equity participation, and in good quality mitigation programs that are flowing from those sorts of projects.
Thank you very much, Gavin. That's a great response. Here's another very interesting and I think challenging question that goes to the three of you. Someone out there is asking, how would one quantitatively value the potential spiritual cultural impact of a project, and how could one offset any types of impacts? I assume negative or unwanted, undesirable impacts. I think this whole COVID event and lockdowns have given us a lot of time for introspection and thought. I don't know if any of the three of you have something that you might want to say to that question.
Well, Raphael, it's probably a good point from a Chilean perspective. I would say that it could quantitatively impact on a project not going ahead. So it could be a binary issue where I can't get finance because I've totally screwed up something that I've have no support from a community. I can't get the trucks in. I can't do anything. So it could, on one part, mean the entire project is not financeable and therefore won't go ahead. But the flip side is, I think you could value that impact in a positive way through your local law issues, your EIS and your social impact processes, to show an actual asset that the project has by having the consent and the support of the community that's hosting that project. I might turn to Raphael for a Chilean comparative analysis.
Yeah, if I understood correctly, what Diego was asking for, you know, was basically what is the cost at the end of the day of the cultural heritage, or how do you assess in some way this stuff in a project? Is that what you were saying or asking for in a way, Diego?
That's correct, Rafael. It's a bit about the potential spiritual / cultural impact of a project in general. How do you assess that, and if it is accessible, how do you go about offsetting whatever undesirable effects?
Yeah. What I have seen, you know, in the past or in some cases, as I said before, you know, the social license and now a more developed concept, as you said, Gavin, was, you know, is to try to face these kind of issues in anticipations with and you know, before better than later. And what I have seen in some cases is that the companies install or, you know, create some let's say tables of you know, meetings in order to discuss these issues and how to, in some way, how to assess the importance for that community, this cultural heritage, how to handle this stuff in the project. And there are some good stories of success stories regarding this stuff, in the sense that companies that have anticipated this issue in mining projects with 1 or 2 years before starting, you know, the environmental impact assessment, they have made, you know, this kind of meetings with indigenous or with the communities to understand and to agree on a way to save and respect and even more honor, you know, these kind of things. And as a result of that, you know, we have seen the creation of some museums, as Diego pointed out, the installation of certain areas, you know, taken or you know, under the care of the company, creation of some investigation, I mean, funds, in order to investigate more on this and try to develop the cultural heritage in this area. But the key element that I would like to point out is that to the extent that the companies has, in anticipation to the projects, provoke a direct dialogue and conversation and you know, with the communities, you can assess, you can face this stuff, you can evaluate, and you can give the securities to the financiers and later to the sponsor of the projects that you will have a good ambience to develop the project.
Thank you, Rafael. Very enlightening. Very enlightening. Clara, do you have something you want to add to that, or should I jump to the next?
I would. I agree with what both Gavin and Raphael have said, and the importance of early engagement. I think that I'd interpreted the question a little bit differently, and which is that, you know, can you put a price on cultural affectation, basically? And I would probably dispute the approach that's taken by that. In the experience that we've had as a company developing projects and having community outreach, I think that approaching things from a financial perspective is actually not the correct way to do it. And I think that a lot of times kind of taking out the checkbook and going and just saying, oh, what's this worth to you? Let me write a check is not a very helpful way of getting things done and making sure that everyone is happy at the end of it. I completely agree with what Raphael said, that what you need is an early engagement. You need a very genuine engagement, and you need to understand what people actually want. And sometimes when you're used to being a project developer, you're used to seeing things in a spreadsheet and a financial model and saying, look, how much is this? And that's just not the approach that you can take to community engagement. Community engagement is not really in the end about money. It's about being part of the community, understanding what's happening and understanding what the community actually needs. And sometimes fixing the problem is not a question of money, it's a question of understanding and doing what needs to be done as a participant in that community. And so that in our view anyway is a much more successful approach than trying to put an economic value on these things.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Clara. And let me just, because we're coming close towards the end of the time allotted to this event, let me read to all three of you a comment from one of the participants, and then I'll follow through with a final question to try and wrap things up so we can get to our final speakers. Australia is a participating member of ISO TC 197, Hydrogen Technologies, which is involved in developing standards in international hydrogen standards. It would be good to see Chile join this activity to promote standards harmonization, technical alignment, and regulatory coherence. All the major energy importers are involved: China, Japan, India, and Korea. Again, I think this is a reflection of the space and the room that exists and that can be created for a very bright future for lawyers. With that said, and keeping that in mind, we've had fantastic presentations from different areas: energy, mining, land, and social. And just on the heels of the last question that you asked, that we asked, I don't know, is there today a new consensus as to the order in which the factors that a mining, energy, or large infrastructure project, for that case, has to take into account in order to be successful? I mean, Clara, you've mentioned financing. It's not about securing financing and writing checks and then trickle down to everything else. Maybe today social is more important. Maybe environment is more important. Maybe there's a new sense of spiritual, cultural associated to what the social would be in ESG. What do any of the three of you think, if at all, is the correct order to date? Or is there such a thing? And let me just add one more difficulty to that. In that equation, you have to find a spot to include a glass of Shiraz. Where would that fit? Where would that fit in?
I already used wine in my talk, so I've already done that. No, I would like to say that I think that what we're kind of consolidating around as a business community and as a society, and this has been reflected in some of the letters from Larry Fink to his companies where there's investments from Larry Fink. I think that we're kind of consolidating around an idea of purpose. And that purpose is something that can't just be to make money. We need to have a role in society as companies, as people who work in companies. I often say that corporations are cooperations. They're basically people coming together to cooperate to do something in a certain defined way. And so what we actually are looking at is purpose. What does your company do to make the world better? And obviously you have to make money along the way, otherwise you're not going to be a company that's around for very long. But you need to be considering all of the factors that you've just mentioned, Diego. You need to be making sure that you're environmentally responsible. You need to make sure that you're being a good member of the community. And so all of that, to me, comes together in this overarching concept of what is your purpose, what are you doing, and why are you here, how are you making the world a better place. And I think that that's something that all of us, as we're leaders in companies and leaders in the business community, need to be thinking about.
And the glass of Shiraz will certainly help evoke a
Helps you to
sensation
find
of
your purpose. I do
Yes.
find that a glass of Shiraz in the evening definitely helps me to find my purpose.
It's 9:23 a.m. here in Brisbane, and although COVID has brought about a bit of day drinking, I still think it's just a touch early.
Really.
But give me time.
Cheers.
I think Clara's exactly right. I actually gave a presentation to the Ampler conference last year about driving more value because of values, and I think that's exactly it. I think it's companies finding their values and the way that they go about making the planet and the people on it a better, thinking about it more so actually drives greater value for the company. And the flip side is equal. If your investors and your shareholders should see that your position in the world or your values are an anathema to them, then they will leave in droves, or they will say, put resolutions to your AGM that make you change the way you do your business. And I think that it's not a tipping point even. I think it's an express train that isn't stopping. That, as Clara said, that purpose or those values are the way that you will itemize what is important for a particular project, and that will be those social, environmental, and financial issues coming together in a nice Venn diagram to drive the value at the end and the profit.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you
do
so
agree
much,
with
Gav.
what you have said, and really, I fully agree with what you said. And the experience is that every time that the companies has focused on revenues and not taking care of the social ambience, communities, or environmental, is a project that has just in the next door, problems and facing some situations with, and the projects and companies are created for long time and not with this short view. And in that sense, you have to take care of the people, of the purpose, of the all this stuff. Not only the revenues or the benefits, which are important, by the way, but part of the equation.
Important and necessary, and as we see, this is a very dynamic and ever-evolving phenomenon. So it makes you stay on your toes and awake, listening and attend to everything that's going on. Thank you to the three of you for your presentations and for these questions and answers, this roundtable. And with that, we'll wrap up this portion of the Q&A session, and I'll pass over to Gordon so that he can present Mr. Barry Irwin.
Thanks, Diego. Look, before I introduce Barry Irwin, I just want to add my thanks to Diego's, to the panel. It was an excellent session and a great way to start our Chilean experience. And I also want to thank Diego for his excellent facilitation of the event. Thank you, Diego. Barry Irwin is a highly respected energy and resources lawyer with a focus on M&A and projects. He's a former partner of the international law firm Allen & Overy. He was based in Singapore, and while he was in Singapore, working throughout the region and in Australia, he essentially established Ampler's first international branch. And so today I'm introducing him so that he can provide you with a little bit of an insight into the benefits of Ampler for professionals in South America, and the development of their legal knowledge and the law in Chile from the experience of establishing and running AMPLA's first international branch. Barry.
Thank you, Gordon. As Gordon says, I'm a member of AMPLA, and I have been for more than 25 years. Most of that time was as a member in Australia, but as he says, also in Singapore, because I was asked to set up a branch in Singapore several years ago. That was the first step in what you might call the internationalization of AMPLA. But it's important to point out, I think, that even before then, AMPLA was, for various reasons I'll come to shortly, quite an international organization to start with. It had members from the US, from Canada, from the UK, and elsewhere around the world, and I think Latin America as well. It was, when I first became part of AMPLA, very much an organization for lawyers and lawyers only. But when we started up in Singapore, despite the fact that there are about 130 offices of international law firms represented in Singapore, they tend to be quite small. And so we thought the depth of possible membership was quite limited. So we quite deliberately extended AMPLA membership to non-lawyers, but only to those who are or were genuinely active in the sector, so investment bankers, regulators, and the like. That turned out to be quite successful. And over the years, AMPLA in Singapore has become quite well established. And so for some time, there's been a very obvious impetus for AMPLA to move beyond Singapore, and other obvious jurisdictions included Chile and places like Indonesia, possibly Malaysia as well. So why should any one of you become a member of AMPLA? Well, first of all, I think it's probably fair to say that it is unique globally. It has an annual conference, which is quite singular. It's not, however, just another conference organizer, which is how many of its competitors, with the possible exception of the Rocky Mountain Mineral Law Foundation, might be perceived. It was started, as Professor Cromwell said at the outset, as a means of educating lawyers, and that to this day remains its primary purpose. So we often use the expression that it's experts educating experts. That ethos resulted in the annual conference, which I've mentioned, but also the journal. And the AMPLA journal is, I think, unique. It is a truly academic and simultaneously practical analysis of energy and resources law in Australia and around the world. And it gets cited in judicial proceedings on a fairly regular basis. So that provides a member of AMPLA with access to, unique access, I think, to international best practice when it comes to the law, but not just the law, also other aspects of the energy and resources sector. Those journal articles, which now extend over 40 years and are accessible online to members, are essentially an unmatched resource. In addition to that, the various branches, including in particular Singapore, in my experience, get together for monthly or at least regular gatherings at which people can exchange views on the latest current trends, but also to meet each other and become aware of who is active in the sector. Another part of AMPLA, which is probably accidental given its genesis, but which I think is almost as important, is the networking opportunities that it provides. So it means that lawyers in private practice can meet their colleagues, they can meet prospective clients, regulators can meet that group of people, and in-house counsel have always been a very active part of the organisation as well. So in addition to all the expertise and the fundamental educational thrust of the organisation, there's a fabulous opportunity for networking with the industry as well. Importantly, and from the outset, one of the basic tenets is you leave the competition at the door. So to the extent that it involves private practitioners getting together, there is an expectation, and in practice it really does happen, that people leave behind the competitive nature of the business when they gather as AMPLA members. And then the last thing I think that's worth mentioning is that I saw some recent email exchanges about possible content for the Chilean group going forward for seminars and the like. And there was a particular focus on Chile and interaction with Australia. And my view, and I think it's one that Gordon shares, is that that's not necessary. There need be no particular focus on Australia. The relationships that AMPLA can generate are valuable and obviously something to be promoted. But at the end of the day, I think the group should be sitting there and discussing what is of most interest in Chile. And if that happens to be Chilean practice rather than how it interacts with Australia, then so be it. By way of illustration, when the Singapore group gets together, we rarely talk about Australia. We might talk about other jurisdictions in the region like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, China, at least as often as we talk about Australia. But that was just an observation based on those email exchanges. Gordon, back to you.
Thank you, Barry, for those comments. We are very interested to talk with people about their interest in AMPLA. And following this event, we will be contacting you with details of this program, but also of the future program that the committee in Chile has already commenced organising. Diego, I'll throw back to you after that, and you can lead us to the closing.
Thank you so much, Gordon, and thank you, Barry. Everyone should feel absolutely invited to get more information about AMPLA and this initiative we've undertaken. And for this purpose, and as a wrap up, thanking once again our panelists for their generous contribution to this event. I'm delighted to present Ms. Jimena Lopez, who is the head of the Chile-Australia Chamber of Commerce, known as AUSCHAM. Jimena will be speaking to us about our next event and AUSCHAM and how we can interact among each other. Jimena, please. You're on mute.
Thanks, Diego. First of all, thanks for AMPLA to be part of this strategic alliance with AUSCHAM, and congratulations to all the speakers. Muchas gracias a todos los asistentes a este evento, que para los chilenos ya es muy tarde, por eso quiero hacerlo en español, y quiero mostrarles los siguientes eventos que vamos a tener junto con AMPLA durante este año. ¿Se ve bien ahí o no?
No se ve, Jimena.
¿No se ve?
No.
Ahí sí.
Ahí apareció. Oh, desapareció.
Sí.
No.
Ahora sí.
Bueno, durante este año vamos a tener 3 eventos programados junto con AMPLA. uno en junio, otro en septiembre y otro en diciembre, los cuales los iremos informando a través de nuestros newsletters, y espero que haya más chilenos que participen, porque el intercambio de experiencia entre Chile y Australia es uno de nuestros grandes hitos que tenemos como Cámara, y queremos que junto con AMPLA podamos compartir más con esto. Así que los dejamos invitados para junio, septiembre y diciembre, así conversando sobre tan interesantes temas.
Muchas gracias, Jimena. Thank you, everybody. With that, we have come to an end of this first inaugural event. 8 minutes overtime schedule, so thank you for all those who had the patience to stay on. And have a wonderful Friday, those of you in Australia. For those of us, we can rest here in Chile, so we can have a wonderful Friday. A great weekend to everybody, and welcome to AMPLA. Let's stay in touch, and everyone, please be safe.